Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alumni UK Live. I'm Scott McDonald, the Chief Executive of the British Council, and it's terrific to see so many of you from around the world today. Let me start with a thank you from all of us at the British Council for being part of this group. It's an extraordinary community when you think about it. Each of you, for some reason only you know, chooses to be connected to UK education. Since you come from different countries, backgrounds, and had different motivations for the choice, it means we have a really eclectic mix of people here and the foundations for an interesting and powerful network. I hope that during your experience in the UK, each of you gain knowledge, skills, friendships, and networks. But I also hope you gain something more profound, which is an understanding and openness to other cultures, perspectives, and ways of life. From my perspective, this is one of the secrets of a fulfilling life. If you can open your mind to others' ideas and approaches, your understanding grows and your ability to lead, drive change, and impact improves. And life is just much more interesting every day. The world is now more fractious and polarized than it's been for a very long time. And that openness to others and the willingness to understand and build trust is going to be a critical part of whether we move towards a future of peace and prosperity or one of conflict, war, and strife. Well, once the move towards peace and prosperity seemed quite certain, right now it doesn't at all, and getting there is going to require leadership. Many of you are already or will be leaders, innovators, scientists, entrepreneurs, civil servants, and many other things in your own fields. And we hope this program will be more than a nostalgic reminder of your experience with the UK. We want it to be a network that can help support you and you can tap into to build connections. And we also hope it can be a force multiplier for cultural connections. Since launching in 2022, more than 77,000 alumni from over 200 countries around the world have joined. And this year we'll be expanding what we offer with regular learning and development opportunities. We're focusing on practical career sessions designed to build essential skills. There'll be regional insights into job markets around the world. We'll host conversations focused on specific sectors and the skills that are in demand. And we'll continue to bring everyone together through flagship events like this one. You can expect one or two opportunities each month to learn, connect, and develop. And there'll also be opportunities locally organized by the British Council offices around the world. Beyond the specific events, the network is also about creating a platform for leadership. And through initiatives such as our SDG and regional ambassadors, the climate action grants, the disability inclusion community, and our Alumni Voices survey, we're working with you to understand your journeys and give you an additional tool to drive change. And through the Alumni Awards, we celebrate the outstanding achievements of this group around the world and hope to strengthen your platforms. Today is a celebration, but it's also a reminder that this community doesn't end when your studies do. We want you to always be part of the family and support each other. So thank you for being part of Alumni UK. I hope you enjoy the conversations and make new connections today. And it now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Helen Etheridge, our lead for Alumni UK, who will be hosting our keynote session. And I leave you with my best wishes for a good day ahead.
Thank you very, very much, Scott, for those opening remarks and for being with us this morning. I say morning, of course, you're joining us from all over the world. So very, very warm welcome to everybody who's joining. And thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat there and for all of the emotions that are coming through with the applause and the hearts. It's really nice to see. As Scott said, I'm Helen. I lead the alumni work at the British Council. And I find myself in quite a fortunate position, really. I have the pleasure of working with people from around the world who've studied with the UK on a daily basis. And myself and the team, our work is to continuously develop the British Council's offer to you, alumni of UK institutions, really to support you in your development, both professional and personal as well, and to really build your global network, which is what Alumni UK is all about, and maintain that connection to the UK, whether or not you've chosen to remain in the UK or go elsewhere. So the best way to stay in touch with us and to find out about the initiatives that Scott mentioned is by registering with us, which you will have done already through the website to be at today's event. But I do encourage you to also follow us on LinkedIn if you don't already, because you can find out lots of information that way. The conference that you're attending today, Alumni UK Live, is an annual event which brings together thousands of alumni from around the world. Last year, when we held this, we had 16,000 of you with us. So it is a really significant event in our calendar, and it's a chance for alumni to come together and to hear from and exchange ideas with leading voices across different fields and sectors. The focus of today's event is on breaking barriers and shaping the future. We will be covering topics ranging from inclusive leadership through to building your networks, how to do that, online and otherwise, and a whole session as well focused on the Sustainable Development Goals and what alumni are actually doing in some of those spaces. So I hope that you're able to stay with us throughout the day, but I know, again, time zones permitting, so sessions are being recorded too. So before we get going with the really interesting stuff, I just want to share a few housekeeping notes with you. First of all, captions are available. You just need to click on the captions button that hopefully you'll be able to see on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. The chat, as you see, is open. So if you haven't done so, please do introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining from. It's really nice to see that. And there will be, we hope, an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. And we will try to come to some of those at the end. So without any further ado, this session that we are now entering into is called A New Era of Leadership, Embracing Inclusivity for a Better Tomorrow. And we're going to focus on why inclusive leadership is not just a nice to have, but really actually an essential. And we're also going to be looking at some of the real challenges that leaders face in advancing diversity, equality, and inclusion in, as Scott said, an increasingly complex and polarized world. So I'm really delighted to be in conversation today with Catherine Meyer. So please do join me in welcoming her here. I'm just going to tell you a few words about her and then I'll bring you, Catherine, into the conversation. So Catherine, if you don't know about her already, is an author, a journalist, an activist, and a co-founder and former president of the Women's Equality Party, as well as the Prima Donna Festival of Ideas and Literature. She has written several acclaimed books, including Amortality, Attack of the 50-Foot Women, and the memoir Good Grief. And her latest novel, Time Life, was published in 2025, I believe. And your next novel, Catherine, which is keeping you very, very busy at the moment, Divide and Rule, Royal Women and Their Battles, is out incredibly soon on May the 21st. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Catherine has had a very distinguished journalism career, including roles at The Economist, as a foreign correspondent for Focus, and at Time, where she served as Europe editor and editor at large. Alongside her writing and journalism, she's been deeply involved in public life, from standing in the European elections to working with the Women of the World Festival. And Catherine continues to champion gender equality and cultural change, which is really where this conversation is positioned, I suppose. So good morning, Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us. I think first off, just so people get to know you that little bit better beyond what I've just said, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a few words about where you are today, and you might want to say a bit about where you're from and where you yourself studied, given that we're a community of alumni. So over to you, Catherine.
Gladly. And actually, I have only one very slight corrective to what you said, but it's an important one. The new book is non-fiction. And given that it's about the monarchy, that's pretty important because a lot of what is written about the monarchy and royal women is fiction. So I'm writing about, my book is about royal women from Anne Boleyn right the way through to Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. And it's about the ways in which women are co-opted into culture wars and become vehicles for royal women and become vehicles for disinformation, which is actually very relevant to what we're talking about today. Because, you know, the when we look at the sweep of history and hopefully learn from it, what we don't see is all of the players. We only see, you know, people who are already in positions of power and privilege are the ones whose histories are reliably recorded, which means that a lot of women's history is not there. But it gives them disproportionate importance to what we think we know about them. So that's why I embarked on that particular project. Um, in terms of my background, some of you on will possibly be able to detect that I have an odd accent. My accent is the product of having lived in many different countries as a child. I'm actually American born. Um, I am a dual national. For how long, given that both the country I live in now and the one that I come from have people who wish to abolish dual nationality. I've always thought of myself as an internationalist. Um, I have lived in the UK now for many years, but I've also lived and worked in Germany and many other countries. Um, I studied in Germany as well as in the UK, so I did my first degree. Well, sorry, I should say my only degree, but I did one of those degrees with the year abroad, and then I went back so I spent a year abroad at Freiburg University from the University of Sussex in the UK, and then went back and lived in Germany until they threw me out because at that stage I only had a US passport. Um, so I've also had some experience of navigating borders and questions of identity and all of those things, but it's hardened me in my belief in the importance of international connection and understanding. So thank you so much for having me here today because it's right in it's so much what I believe in, and it couldn't be more important than it is right in this moment.
Absolutely. No, you're the perfect candidate. And I hadn't realized actually you had that. Obviously, I knew of your European work, but I didn't realize that you'd studied in Germany. And I could talk for a long time about that. I won't. It's not about me. But I was out studying in Bamberg actually and did a
Oh,
similar sort of thing to you. So there we are. Germany's a great place to study too. Um, I wonder if we talk first, maybe. I'd mentioned you founded several initiatives through your career, and I'd be interested, given the topic we're talking about today, what those experiences have taught you about how networks, access, and inclusion, how they really work in practice. I think we'd be interested in your story really, because you can read about this, can't you? But it's nice to hear from somebody's own experience.
and I think one of the important things to understand is where journalism fits into this picture, because actually, as a journalist, I ended up in the managerial class. I was an editor, which meant that I ran teams of people, which meant that I was involved in hiring. So, although journalism is something which, in some ways, um, tells you that rather than getting involved in activism or change making, you're the one who's supposed to sit back and tell other people what's going on in the world as opposed to mix in with it. Um, I realized very early on that the stories that we told as journalists have a huge impact on the understanding of the world, and that the stories that we told were chosen by very undiverse teams of editors. Um, because I worked in sort of serious journalism, I would be surrounded by a culture that always thought in very male ways about what was serious and what warranted coverage, and would often result in, for example, treating issues like who does the caring in society as things that they would refer to in magazine terms, the back of the book, stuff that goes in the less important soft news section or features. They thought anything to do with women. They quite often had women's sections in those days, that was fluff. Um, and on the other hand, if there was anything that involved conflict reporting, now obviously in today's world, we see the importance of conflict reporting, but it matters who is reporting the conflict, and it matters what aspects of the conflict they're seeing. So I've worked as a conflict reporter as well, but one of the things I was able to do, for example, was when there were the first elections in Iraq in which women were standing as candidates, I went to Iraq with a female photographer so that we could have access to these female candidates and report the election from the point of view of these women who were standing and find out why they were standing and what that meant. So even those sorts of things really, really make a difference. I then went on to found all, you know, I'm a kind of serial co-founder because I also was involved in a technology think tank. And I think, we cannot understand the world today without understanding the extraordinary disruptive impacts of new technologies, both on my own industry, but really on everything now. And I, even in that, where there was a lot of corporate, there were huge corporations involved in that think tank, I insisted on creating a board, an advisory board that did its best to retrofit all of the diversity that was lacking in the rooms that I would find myself sitting in, where not only would I be the only woman, but where there would be nobody of color, there would be nobody who was at the sharp end of some of the technologies that were being discussed, or who could speak to the importance of those technologies in accessibility for people who, for example, for whatever reason, couldn't leave home. So again, always thinking about that. Founding the Women's Equality Party was almost entirely accidental. I was, as mentioned by Helen, I am on the founding committee of the Women of the World Festival, which is also now a global festival. And on that founding board, there is a wonderful woman who some of you will know, but others not, called Sandy Toksvig. She's very famous in this country as a because she does a lot of television work, but she's actually a polymath. She's an author, an activist, a playwright, she does so many different things. And she and I became firm friends, but we are similar ages, similar background, weirdly similar background, because she's Danish, British, but also lived in the US, and middle class, of course. And we started talking about how startling it was to us to be attaining our great ages and not seeing the progress we had expected when we were young. People like us who were born in her case, late 50s, my case, early 60s, we grew up believing that there would be equality by now. We believed in the myth of progress, that this was something that just happened without input. And so we started talking about what we could think of to do to supercharge the progress that at that point in time, when we were having these conversations, was indeed happening, but very slowly. We're now, of course, in a world where a lot of the gains are being reversed. So we're in a regressive cycle. But we decided uh, that we would go ahead and basically, I talked about the idea that maybe a women's party could supercharge progress in part of the WOW Festival. And overnight, thousands of people signed up on my Facebook page to starting a party that I wasn't actually intending to start. So I rang Sandy, and she and I decided to do it together. But that immediately presented the problem. Here we are, two white middle class women, you know, affluent, um, yet we want this to be a party that reaches the furthest first. And so and the speed with which people were signing up was both wonderful and terrifying because, of course, even the fact that people had the time to join, had the impulse to join, it already said something about their levels of privilege and their levels of accessibility. Even having the data package to be able to go online and have these conversations, much less come to the first meetings we held. And so one of the things that became clear really early on was, in an ideal scenario, when you are setting something up, you don't start retrofitting your diversity, equity, and inclusion retrospectively. It's something that needs to be baked in from the very beginning. But on the other hand, you have to, if you're setting something up, take advantage of the huge swell of energy that we had. So we went from, it was an idea that I voiced aloud in March 2015. By June 2015, we had a party. And when we opened for membership, we got to 45,000 people almost instantly. Um, and we ran our first elections in May 2016. And in the London Assembly and mayoral elections, we came close to 5% of the vote, and 350,000 people voted for us, which may not seem like much, but in UK electoral terms, and with very little media, that's a kind of, it shows you what the appetite was, but it shows you we were doing something right. Nevertheless, we had to do a huge amount of work to make sure that the party was not in our image. That's the key thing. I think when you look at technology startups and when you look at indeed the big beasts of technology that are wreaking such havoc in our world, you see that they are all the same kind of, usually men, and usually men who know a lot more about technology than anything else, but do not know that that's what they know more about. And so sorry, I realize I've talked for a long time, but there's so much to say. With Prima Donna Festival, when we started that, we were able to bring to bear the lessons from the Women's Equality Party. And so the very first meeting to discuss founding a festival, which had at its heart um, diversity and inclusion, because as an author, I had seen how few women, how few people of color, how few people with who were in other ways marginalized would appear at the big literary festivals. And we wanted to change that, but we also wanted to change who could come to the festivals because they can be expensive. A lot of people don't have the time to come. A lot of people just don't feel they're for them. So we wanted to do something different, and the only way to achieve that was to have the right people at the table at the very first meeting, which we did. But that actually meant, and this was one of the most interesting learnings for me, that meant paying people who could not afford, because of childcare issues, for example, paying them to attend a speculative meeting. So we had to find money up front to support people's access. In the same way that in the Women's Equality Party, we supported candidates by fundraising for them to have free childcare and any other support they needed.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. And you didn't speak too long at all. It's exactly where I hoped you would go really with that. And I suppose touching on that last part you were saying there about getting the right people at the table, I have kind of two questions which maybe you can answer together. The first is, if you have your existing network, and I imagine a lot of, somebody's network might be people who are very similar to them, as you've kind of alluded to. So how you kind of break out of that and make sure that you're in contact with different people to yourself. That's the first question. I think that would be really useful for all of us. And the second one is on the point of tokenism. So how do you make sure that you're involving the right people, but not simply because, they are from where they're from or the type of person that they are, I'd be very interested in that as well. So if those two could be sort of broached together.
But great question. And indeed, I made a kind of serious error right at the start of the Women's Equality Party in that respect. It wasn't tokenism, but I underestimated the challenges to people who are already marginalized of taking on public roles. I learned a lot about that over the years and would not make that mistake again.
Mhm.
But Sandy and I, right from the outset, were very clear that neither of us should be the public faces of the party. I mean, we were in the sense that what we could leverage our you know, I keep using the term privilege, but Sandy's on television. I'm a best-selling author. Between us, we know lots of famous people, lots of people with money. So it meant we could get people to do fundraisers for us. It meant an advantage in terms of getting publicity and media publicity, but they really only ever wanted Sandy and me. So that was something we struggled with a lot. And it gave us a sort of a bigger platform to begin with than somebody else would have. But we were very aware that if one of us became for example, the leader of the party, it would already send a message about what kind of party it was that would be the wrong message and not what we wanted. So we were determined to create a platform to raise other people. And I, in that spirit, approached a very wonderful Black British woman who is an activist and a very major figure in the cultural scene here. At the time, not she has become subsequently a major player in the cultural scene here. But she was not very well known, but I already knew her and indeed had mentored her. So I knew how brilliant she was. And I tried to persuade her to be the first leader of the party because we knew that we had to start with the leader and then have a democratic process in order to choose a leader.
Mhm.
You can't start a party without a leader. Um, and she thought about it very seriously. She knew me, so she knew that it wasn't tokenistic in the sense of me trying to put somebody up to be just a concatenation of their characteristics, or for me to try and direct them behind the scenes. So she
Mhm.
knew it was a genuine approach, and she was very tempted by it, I think. But she said, I didn't really understand the amount of abuse she would get. I didn't really understand the sort of emotional labor that people like her go through in doing these jobs that put them in the firing line. And I also didn't understand how hard it had been for her then as a freelance to make a living at all. And I was asking her to do something speculatively that might in the end result in a paid job, as it did. We did have two leaders of the party, both of whom did have good salaries. But at that point, who knew whether this was just going to be something where we talked about it, tried to do things, and it failed again. So um, anyway, I I came to I, I came to understand that. And with the festival, with Prima Donna Festival, one of the things that was the people who we asked to have on stage. And one of the things about Prima Donna is if you look at our statistics, most festivals have a minority of women and an even smaller minority of people of color, and they have very, you know, they're they tend to all be known names. But also there's something else they do, which is that if they do have people who are quote unquote diverse, they get them there to talk about their diversity. And so one of the things we would do with Prima Donna is say to people, "You're great, come and talk about this thing that you're really interesting on."
Actually working on there.
Yeah, yeah. So not about what your identity is. Don't come as a representative of your oppressed class. Come and have fun. Come and show who you are, what you think, whatever. And so that was one of the most exciting differences in terms of what we were able to do there. But for me, the biggest thrill of all was the audience statistics, which showed us at one of the more recent festivals, 70% of the audience had never been to a festival before, and a
Oh,
lot of
incredible. Mm.
and a lot of them were from lower income or no income groups. So, that's for me, that's the exciting thing about this kind of work. But also, to the point that we're discussing today, the real thrill and joy of these things is that they actually worked so much better, and you would just see these extraordinary talents coming through who would not otherwise come through. And the second leader of the Women's Equality, both the leaders of the Women's Equality Party, Sophie Walker and Mandu Reid, extraordinary women. Neither of them would have gone into politics. Both of them would be, both of them should be running the country, frankly. But Mandu Reid also had the distinction of being the first woman of colour uh, and the first openly bisexual woman to run a political party, a major political party in the UK.
Fantastic. Thank you. No, thanks, Catherine. I wonder, without kind of, you know, going off in a totally different direction, but you did allude earlier to having had positions in quite senior management in large organizations. Um, and so I was hoping to hear from you about your thoughts on what genuinely inclusive leadership looks like, you know, rather than just kind of a tick box exercise, which unfortunately it can sometimes be. And in your experiences, where you've seen instances of, you know, this falling a bit short, actually as well, where it hasn't really worked out. Um,
Oh, I mean, there's so much. It's at corporate levels. I've worked for a lot of big organizations as well. And one of the things there is outsourcing DEI to HR departments. And if unless unless there is, first of all, an understanding of what DEI even is, because people just sloganize about it and they see it as something they have to do rather than something they should be doing because it will make their organization better. So you need that understanding, which, by the way, there is so much research out there that shows that groupthink in organizations is bad, that if you have an undiverse staff or a staff that is diverse, but the diversity, as in, for example, publishing, something I know a lot about, um, publishing can look deceptively diverse. But when you look at it, it's a pyramid with kind of white. Again, I'm talking about the UK here now, but this would probably be the same across Europe and the US, where the at the pyramid at the apex of the pyramid will mostly be white men, and the further down you get, that's where your diversity is. Um, the UK monarchy is hilarious that way. They publish diversity, and of course, the Windsors are a huge international brand who are representing realms in the Caribbean as well, and all over the world. And yet, when they published their diversity stats, they wouldn't break down what it actually looked like in terms of who was doing what job, but they did eventually sort of provide statistics which showed them having um, well below the percentage in the population of people of color, But I know from my dealings with the organization that most of those people are in the service roles rather than in the executive roles. So in organizations, you need that understanding of that it is good for you, that it is not tick box, that it is not a it is not really implemented if you have if you have the people who represent your diversity in roles where they have no actual influence over the strategy or output of whatever it is you're doing. And you need to, making people feel included is again, not just feel included, be included. There's the terrible amounts of sloganizing, these corporate be happy days, but they don't actually do anything to you know make to carry through on that promise. Um, and they don't know what to do when people kick out against it. So um, again, in journalism, you see over and over again people who complain about how they have been prevented from asserting themselves, um, will actually themselves be identified as troublemakers, or whistleblowers identified as troublemakers. So an inclusive leadership is one that understands all of these things, but also understands that these things are the job of leaders. They should not be outsourced. There was a great, though short-lived, Australian initiative where the Australian sort of equality commissioner went to the CEOs of all the biggest Australian companies and got them to sign up for a scheme where they had to find ways to make their companies uh, more, better on all the different metrics. They defined the metrics, the DEI metrics, and they because all in Australia, all of these CEOs were male, and many of them gave in to a kind of competitive impulse. They started competing with each other to see who could do better on this scheme. And they came up with all of these things like making flexible working the default, and making fixed hours exceptional. They came up with something called supplier multiplier, which meant that you not only paid attention to your own metrics, but you used suppliers. You gave preference to suppliers who were doing a good job on these things. There are so many things that can be done. But interestingly, that scheme fell apart as soon as it worked for several years, but as soon as the CEOs moved on, their successors didn't see the value of it. And of course, we're now in a world that's demonizing all of this as woke nonsense, as opposed to something that is demonstrably going to make an organization work better.
Absolutely. And on that point, I mean, there is, it can't be disputed there is a growing backlash against, you know, equality, diversity, and inclusion. And so I wonder if you have seen from your work leaders sort of getting a bit quieter potentially about the EDI work that they do, where once, as you've demonstrated there, they may have been a bit louder and prouder about it.
They've literally rebranded it in many cases. Um, so there are all sorts of I can give you anecdotal evidence on this. I don't have the stats on it, but I have talked to a lot of people in big corporations, in big organizations, who have, particularly those in the US, because of the chilling effect of the current government there. They were, they all kind of caved before they had to, because they wanted not to lose government business, or they felt they would be demonized. And in many cases, it meant that they abandoned all these very successful programs that they'd had, or they rebranded them. So things like, networks for um, LGBTQIA plus employees would suddenly be retired. Um, but some of them haven't actually gone away. They've just got a different name, and they don't have such overt support from the top from the leaders in those organizations. But that's a terrible shame because that really matters, you know. So although a lot of companies would um, wash themselves in whatever um, area this was, whether they were greenwashing or gay washing or women washing or whatever, it still mattered that you could see that there was buy-in, at least to some degree, from the top. And now these things have gone underground. So I was talking to a woman who works in a very big corporation, um, and she says that they have had specific injunctions to drop all of this stuff, and that she and her colleagues have been working, and she's really high up in this company, and she and her colleagues have been working a kind of guerrilla mission to reinvent it and keep it embedded in the company. But it's really really under stress. And of course my own former colleagues, I call myself a recovering journalist now because I'm not employed as a journalist, but my former colleagues in the media, both sides of the Atlantic, are happily allowing themselves to be used to write anti-woke, to use woke as a pejorative and to help demonize these ideas that until recently had been accepted as a kind of mainstream political consensus, that EDI is a good thing, that you get more out of you get better talent, you get better ideas, you get better outcomes, as well as it being nicer for people, which is, in this world also deeply important.
Would you have any tips? I'm sure we've got lots of people in the audience today who are themselves leaders on a smaller to larger scale. Would you have any tips for those people operating in this environment now, who are committed to equality and diversity and inclusion and to really bring people along with them on that journey?
Well, I mean, it's a very important thing you said about bringing people along on the journey, because part of the problem with the media messaging that's going on, the sort of anti-woke backlash, is that some of the work of persuasion that we thought we'd done needs to be done again. And that's where I find that the statistics, the kind of research that shows the better organizational outcomes from EDI, I don't feel in many ways we should have to always make that point, because you can also just say, it's so much better to do this on every level. But if
Mm.
you need to persuade people, that can be the way to bring them on that journey. And I also think my main point is not to give up. What you do see, and you're seeing around the world in terms of the um, ebb and flow of political fortunes. French election results were very interesting just now. Um, the world is anything but a monolith, and there are many people who have never abandoned these values and who passionately want to see them implemented. And um, from that point of view, I think, there is, you keep doing it, you find a way to do it. Either you stand up and be counted. I mean, I'll give you another example where it went horribly wrong recently. Anthropics in Anthropic, the big tech company. Um, when they first were coming to prominence, they positioned themselves as the ethical tech company as against companies like Palantir, which, as I'm sure we all know, does so much to help ICE in the US, and is involved in surveillance and various and repression around the world in various ways. And Anthropic was going to be the kind of anti-Palantir, and they talked about being ethical as a business model. Um, and then at some point recently, the CEO said, "Oh, actually, ethics isn't working as a business model," and sort of more or less abandoned it. But then came, and even in spite of attempting to what appeared to be to um, make themselves more like other companies so as not to lose advantage, have found themselves in this crazy battle with the Pentagon over whether their technology should have guardrails in it with respect to weapons. And the Pentagon is literally, sort of uh, decided that it was terribly important that weapons should be allowed by to, as it were, to decide to deploy themselves, which is clearly a terrible idea on so many different levels. Um, but Anthropic itself, because of its, it had a position, it appeared to abandon the position. People are so confused about where Anthropic is in any of this now. So they haven't even done themselves an obvious service by having a position of principle and then abandoning it. Um, so I think courage of convictions is my other point now. Um, I mean, as in my personal life, I've sometimes suffered the consequences of doing the things that I believe in, but I've never regretted it.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. I'm listening to you here and seeing all of the questions coming in from our audience, and I'm going to pull a few out if that's all right with you. And I see there's a theme. A few of them are saying, obviously, you yourself are a woman, you're a leader, and so I think some people are interested in just your experience of being in leadership roles, particularly as a woman. And I know that, yeah, there's another question here along the same train talking about, practical strategies or mindsets actually that can help women navigate, who are in leadership positions. So a few words on that might be of interest, I think.
That's an interesting one because, I started work very, very young. My first job at The Economist, I was 23 years old, and I was sexually harassed by two bosses in succession, having also been sexually harassed by my professor at university. Um, and so the early part of my career was I was very much aware of that risk of being a woman in the workplace and finding ways to, in some way, almost deny part of who I was in order to protect myself. But I also did what a lot of women of my generation did, which is that we almost desensitized ourselves to harassment and sexism because it was so routine, that if you responded to every single incident, you would just spend your whole life um, on alert, as it were. And so one of the things I had to do then when I came into managerial positions is I had to unlearn some of my ability to screen things out because I had to see it on other people's behalf instead of just seeing it on my own. And then interestingly, in my I had a very wonderful time at Time magazine for nearly all the years I was there, but right towards the end, I then ended up encountering something else that is more affects women differently to men, which is ageism. So I was eventually basically ended up in conflict with them right at the very end of my very long and happy period there, with them trying to replace me with a younger man. And I sued them for sex and age discrimination, which is, when I say I've taken risks in my own life, and suffered consequences from them. But the outcome of that was just extraordinarily positive, in fact, because um, when after I had done that, and after it became public knowledge that I had done that, the person in question had actually moved to another organization in the meantime, because these things take a long period of time. And suddenly, all these people at the place that this person had moved to started saying he was doing the same thing there. So it was a bit like the effect of the Me Too stories, where one Me Too story would trigger revelation, would encourage people to come forward with if there was a pattern of behavior. And it meant it was obviously an enormous boost to my own case that that happened, because it was a pattern rather than just me. And when it's just you, people think this isn't a structural problem, it isn't a systemic problem. They think there's something wrong with you. And so that was one of those things. It might not have happened, I might have lost the flat that I'm speaking to you from, but as it happened, it turned out well, and it turned out in a way that was very helpful to my own mental health, actually, because you do start thinking that you're going crazy. But yeah, I mean, being a woman in leadership positions, I have always thought it is massively important to bring along people who will be marginalized by the system. So other women, yes, but also other kinds of women. So I think in recruitment, you see that, there are some people who are much better at making job applications. That doesn't mean that they'll be better at doing the job.
Yeah.
Um, when we, with Prima Donna Festival, one of the things we did was we launched a prize for unagented, unrepresented authors, which we made spelling and grammar blind, so that people who had not had the benefit of expensive educations would not be disadvantaged in terms of their initial entry. And we also hid every detail of who the applicants were, so that there would not be any kind of bias in terms of seeing a certain, a name that you could identify with a particular group and going, and making a
Yeah.
different decision as a result.
That's fascinating, I suppose, and that a conversation for another day. But with AI being used as much as it is these days, we certainly see it with applications and things that, in a way, it does equal the playing field to a degree, but
Except it doesn't. So,
it
so
doesn't.
another another
Exactly.
another piece of activism that I'm involved in is this.
Society for Hopeful Technologists.
Yeah. So this is a membership. I mean, it's not yet a membership group, but it's a voluntary association of people working in technology, which of course I did in the think tank, and or just sort of people who are interested in making sure that technology is fair. But there are a lot of AI experts involved in it and everything. And all of us who worked in it know that you cannot create something that will in any way even playing fields or be fair unless you are creating something with all of the inputs. And everything about the way AI is trained, from how it's structured to the inputs it takes, where if you think about it, there are a lot of, I talked in my sweep of history with the book that I've written about royal women, about how ordinary women disappeared. It's not just ordinary women. Anne Boleyn, one of the most famous queens who ever lived, and of course died horribly, nobody even knows when she was born or where. Nobody actually knows what she looks like. There are almost no records of her because she wasn't expected to be a queen. And similarly, the data that is being drawn in by large language models in their learning process, um, there are lots and lots of people who fall below, they're not visible they don't generate data. Either they don't want to be seen for very good reasons because they'll be deported if they are or whatever, or they just are too poor to be seen, whatever it is, they don't count, according to, I mean, obviously they should. And so you have that, you have the danger of the ways in which these things learn. They learn by from the loudest voices as well. So you saw that with the early chatbots, that every time they tried to launch a chatbot, within about 24 hours, it would be spouting racism and abuse of, because they're learning from the loudest voices, not the most prevalent ones, the loudest ones. So AI is a real danger, but that's why, I I believe, at my point in life, I believe that I need to be doing whatever I can wherever I can, and that's why I'm part of this Society for Hopeful Technologists. Though I will say we've got the best acronym of any society ever. We're so hot.
That is very good. It's very good. I'm conscious of time, but I do want to squeeze in one last question before I just alert people to our next session. Um, and that's, our audience today is from all around the world, quite literally. And there have been a few questions there about operating either as a leader or another member of staff within a very multicultural or organization. And just any thoughts you have on that, any tips on navigating that to best effect, I suppose.
Well, I think multiculturalism and international input is one of the best kinds of diversity from, one again, you look at all the great corporate disasters where they've tried to expand into countries without understanding anything about the country. Um, you look at, on a very simplistic level, people providing goods or services to markets that they don't understand. Um, so I think for me, leadership is, this is ironic given how much I've talked in the last hour, but leadership is about listening and learning. And and I hate the word empowering when it's used, women's empowerment. It's like who that already tells you that there's somebody who thinks they have the right to give us
Give the
power.
power. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but within an organizational setting, it is about, if you are at leadership level, making sure that people who are not have the ability to speak and be heard, and that you see them as a resource, that every single person you are working with is a repository of knowledge
Mm.
and stuff that you don't know that you need to know. So there's also something about being humble as a leader, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm just thinking about our own teams and things internally, incredibly, diverse in terms of where we're all from, and just the richness of conversation and, getting those inputs that you wouldn't ordinarily have if you were all from the same places is hugely valuable. Um, Thank you ever so much, Catherine. I wish we could keep going because there are so many questions coming in. But I really do appreciate you joining us today, and I hope people have had some food for thought there to start their days or in your afternoon or evening, depending where you are. Um, We've just got 1 minute left now, and I just wanted to let you all know that, of course, this is a day's event. We have 3 other sessions after this. The next one's going to take place in 30 minutes time, so you've got half an hour break. And just a reminder that our sessions will be recorded, so if you've registered with us, you will get that recording. The next session is called Give to Gain, How Women Build Networks of Change Across the World. And as you may notice, it's inspired by the International Women's Day 2026 theme. And it's a panel discussion. It's going to bring together women leaders with international perspectives whose lived experience spans continents, industries, and cultural contexts. It's going to be chaired by Hasina Farid. The session explores how gender equality is accelerated when individuals, organisations, and systems actually give through resources, access, sponsorship, knowledge, and opportunity, and what collective gain looks like when women are supported to thrive. So I hope that you're able to join us for that session. I'm really looking forward to it. And thank you so much again to Catherine. As we leave this session, a little pop-up will ask you a few questions just about your experience of today's event so far. So please do pop in your answers there. That would be hugely beneficial for us as we plan our next events. So please join me in thanking Catherine so much. And thank you to all of you for your time and attention and being so engaged. Thank you, everybody, and see you all soon.